Let's break down some of these offensive impact players from the HBCU Combine.
When you look at the HBCU Combine, and when you start to look around, especially Division I football of the MEAC and the SWAC, you talk about a guy that stands out. He has to be the impact player. And that's from the quarterback position. That's Davius Richards from North Carolina Central. 6'2", measured yesterday at 225 pounds. Ran a 4'6" in the 40. He's a 4-year starter for North Carolina Central. And what he did while he was there, just passed for 8,991 yards, 73 touchdowns, and ran for another 2,026 yards for 44 touchdowns. He's a guy that I think of all the quarterbacks on the HBCU level who has the most upside. And I think he has the opportunity because of his dual threat ability to be able to showcase that and possibly get an opportunity at the next level. I'm not saying drafted, but that free agency may be out there for him in his future to be able to go out, try out for some teams, and maybe make a roster. Jeremy Musa didn't do much in terms of participating, and then Quentin Williams from Howard. I just don't think Quentin Williams has the intangibles for the next level, and that's just me personally. Continuously moving on, look at the running backs, and I think if there's a position, I like the running back position. The only thing about the running back position is the size. When I speak of the size, I'm talking about the height. But let's talk about a guy, Jarvion Howard from Alcorn State, 5'9", 215 pounds, clocked in the 40 of 4.52. Remember, he transferred in from Syracuse, but during his time at Alcorn, he rushed for 2,060 rushing yards. But he also shows he has the ability to be a pass catcher out of the backfield. 29 receptions while at Alcorn. I think he's a guy that has upside to him as well, Jarvion Howard. Another guy, we talked about him a lot during the year, from Texas Southern, Larius Owens. He was everything for Texas Southern. They had nothing else. Larius Owens clocks in 5'8", 185 pounds. Now, that 5'8" is a little tough when you start to talk about in the big league of the NFL. But he clocked in at 4.56 in the 40. During this time, he's also the all-time leading rusher in Texas Southern football history, accounted for 3,137 rushing yards and 24 touchdowns. I like Larius Owens just because he's a playmaker. I think the only issue with him at Texas Southern for me was not seeing the end zone enough. He had 11 touchdowns this past year, but it was just tough for him getting into the end zone over his career. And lastly, on the running back side of a guy that's standing out to me, Latrel Ker from North Carolina Central University. He also played with Davius Richards. Those two were the offense. Clocked 5'8", 197 pounds, just a little bit slower than the rest of the guys that I named in the 40. He clocked in at a 4.77 in the 40. He's a 4-year starter, impactful guy, but he rushed for 2,279 rushing yards, 26 touchdowns. But just like Howard, he also has that ability to be a pass catcher. 72 receptions for 582 yards and 7 touchdowns. You look at Ian Willer from Howard, and as well as Darian Butts, who I think when you looked at his 40 time, he just didn't quite get what I thought you would be looking for a running back on the other side. But Darian Butts coming from Hampton. Those are the guys in terms of the quarterback and the running backs. Now you look at the wide receivers. There's some guys that can be potential playmakers. It wasn't deep at the wide receiver spot, but take a guy like Tamon Cook from North Carolina A&T. 5'10", 184 pounds, clocked a 4.48 in the 40. But what he's known for, although he's a wide receiver, he's a great return man. He can be a return specialist for someone in the NFL. 16 returns for 547 yards, 3 touchdowns, and he ranked 8th nationally for touchdown returns this past year. So he's a big-time playmaker. He can be impactful if you can get him into the right system. A guy who I like very much so since the first game of the year, Marcus Riley from Florida A&M. And believe it or not, he's a former quarterback. Guy went to Louisville, started his career off at Louisville, played in 6 games, then went to Bethune-Cookman, where he was a quarterback, but then transitioned over to the wide receiver spot. Played in 24 games while at Bethune-Cookman, 74 receptions for 995 yards and 6 touchdowns before coming over to FAMU as a grad student. Led the team with 34 receptions, 584 yards, 5 touchdowns, but he also can be big in the return game. We saw that as well. 11 returns for 337 yards and a touchdown. And last from the wide receiver spot, August Petri III, Southern University, transferred to Southern from Rice, from Opelousas, Louisiana. 6'1", 174 pounds, ran a 4.56 in the 40. 1,383 yards and 14 touchdowns in his career. And then Terrell Gardner, just for me, from Alabama A&M, he didn't have the speed in the 40 for me, Scotty, that I think that you're looking for from an NFL-style wide receiver, especially with the game being sped up the way that it is today. And then you look at the tight ends. Got to look at Kamari Young, right? Florida A&M. Big-time playmaker, 6'1", 238 pounds he measured, ran a 4.81 in the 40, 956 receiving yards during his time at Florida A&M with 6 touchdowns. And another guy that stood out to me from Jackson State, made some big plays, especially in that UAPB game last year. DJ Stevens, 6'2", 231 pounds. He clocked in yesterday, 4.89 in the 40, 602 receiving yards, 9 touchdowns during his career at Jackson State. 2 other guys to look for that, for me, I don't think they put up the numbers that they needed to. Tristan Valley from UAPB, and then Brennan Brown from Howard. And then lastly, as I round this thing out, we look at the O-lineman. And if there's any position I think that comes from the HBCU ranks where a guy can get drafted, this is typically the realm of where guys can get their money on the next level.